KPPP LP 88.1 Fargo-Moorhead presents A Mexican Crossing Lines. January 7th, the aftermath of the 1/6 Remembrance, a radio podcast on KPPP LP 88.1 Fargo-Moorhead, streaming on the radio, streaming on Facebook, on YouTube and Twitch. Watch, listen, and learn.
Welcome to Mexican Crossing Lines with your hosts, Cindy Gomez-Schempp.
And Duke Gomez-Schempp.
You're listening to 88.1 FM, KPPPLP Fargo-Moorhead, where we are adding local color to your airwaves. And today's show is going to cover a range of topics on January 6th, the aftermath of the January
6th. Remembrance?
Remembrance,
Yep.
The vigils, the events.
Yep.
And today on January 7, we've had a lot of things happening in the media, in the courts, and I'm going to cover some of the things I think are the most important for you to know on today's show.
Yes, and we've decided to do podcasts, and this way we play them on the radio, and we play them on YouTube and Facebook. You can see it at Duke 1517, Facebook 88.1 Fargo-Moorhead, at Twitch at A Mexican Crossing Lines, and did I say YouTube Duke 1517? Well, you get it twice if I did. You also can find us at kpppfm.com. If you want to contact Cindy, send her an email, cindy at kpppfm.com, or me, Duke, at kpppfm.com. Follow us on Facebook at 88.1 Fargo-Moorhead, the People's Press Project, and Mexi-Can. You can find Cindy, too, a public page on Facebook by going to @CindyGoSchempp. If you want to call us and leave a message on our message line, 701-566-0917. You can also find us on Twitter at @media_PPP.
You can leave about a 3-minute-long message, which you can leave your questions, comments, topic ideas on, and we will play those on the radio.
That's right.
If you have a response to something that I've said on the show, you can also leave that, and I would be glad to play your response. Let's start out by talking today about the Supreme Court case, a very important Supreme Court case about the vaccine mandates.
Oh, okay.
Okay. And of course, you know, President Joe Biden has issued vaccine mandates for any employer that has more than 100 workers, and also a similar requirement for healthcare facilities for all healthcare workers. Why isn't that a thing already?
I know.
Why aren't all the healthcare workers already required right now?
Yeah, it's this mentality in our country of not being vaccinated and this sort of personal freedom to get other people sick makes me sick.
Well, it's the freedom to kill.
Yeah.
And here's the thing I don't understand. Right now we have the surge with this Omicron. We have hospitals all around the country at capacity. We have healthcare workers leaving their jobs in record numbers. They've hit a wall. They're broken. And instead of being able to implement these common sense mandates that you have all your healthcare workers vaccinated so you're not spreading COVID around the hospital, that you have all of the people dealing with elderly in nursing homes vaccinated so they're not spreading a deadly contagious disease to the most vulnerable populations. Instead, we have Republicans, let's be clear about this, fighting these mandates that save lives, fighting vaccinations, which are one of our only ways of protecting ourselves, an effective and safe way to protect yourself from this deadly virus instead of having them already in place.
Imagine that back when polio was going rampant across this country, killing children, killing adults. If this would have been the arguments to not save people, even the measles, all these other vaccines that we've dealt with in our past, it's all forgotten. There's such a short memory of history. Also, there's the rewriting of history that people just don't want to pay attention to, and they've politicized it, made it into a issue. And if that's what they're running on to win the election, God help us.
I don't know if many of their constituents will be left to vote because right now this is a plague of the unvaccinated, and the majority of the people that are dying are people that did not get vaccinated. The people that are vaccinated and boosted, many of them are getting breakthrough infections with this highly transmissible variant, Omicron, but they are not dying. There are some serious illnesses and hospitalizations and even deaths. But by and large, the people that are hospitalized right now and are dying en masse are the unvaccinated.
Yeah, and with those numbers, eventually there's not going to be anyone left. So, get vaccinated. You don't want to be one of those people.
And in today's Supreme Court case, ironically, the lawyers who have COVID, both of the lawyers have COVID, that are arguing the case to stop the mandates. Okay?
They're doing it by teleprompter, right?
Telephone, yes.
Yep, telephone. Okay.
The lawyers who have COVID and aren't allowed in the Supreme Court building because they have COVID and are arguing that the rest of us should have to go to work with unvaccinated and untested people.
Wow. Yep. Just don't take it seriously, do they?
It's like rain on your wedding day. Can you be more ironic?
Yeah.
How does this, even pass the smell test? It's surprising.
Yeah.
So, yes, the Ohio solicitor, I'm going to name them here, General Benjamin Flowers, and Louisiana solicitor General Liz Murrell, will be arguing today against the vaccine and testing requirements by phone, because both of them have tested positive for COVID. And the U.S. Supreme Court was hearing arguments over requests by Republican state officials and business groups to block two of President Joe Biden's common sense vaccine mandates, one for employers with more than 100 workers and a similar requirement for healthcare workers, as the COVID is surging across our country. I've watched a lot of people, commentators for news and lawyers, etc., that were listening to the arguments or, oral arguments. And it's a mixed bag as to how it's going to go. But one of the people that I follow, Eiley Meisel, he seemed to think that the arguments by these two solicitors that are in favor of, blocking these mandates were so stupid that Justice Keegan was like, you could hear how miffed she was in her voice.
Okay.
She was like, are you kidding me? She was like interrupting people like, really? So, these arguments were so stupid that he could palpably tell that the justices, even the ones trying to make arguments in favor of blocking the mandates, just couldn't muster they couldn't bring themselves to accept these ridiculous arguments. So hopefully that means that they're going to uphold this.
That's right. It's hard to even try to conceptualize what reasoning a company would have to make sure people are in risk and getting sick. It's not going to help them when they have sick workers and people dying that they won't be able to produce their projects or do their work. And it's just North Dakota did the same thing. They're objecting to this thing. We're not going to have our companies, Governor Burgum's out there, we're not going to subject our companies to this sort of mandate from the federal government. It's my job to make sure people die in this state.
See, the thing about it is, the United States has been very lucky. It's always had wealth of workers, many of them foreign, undocumented workers, easily exploitable, easily expendable. And they've just always had, an excess of these readily exploitable workers. So if you have people that go on strike, you can bust the strike, you can get rid of the unions. We've been going down this path in this country for a long time.
That's right.
Making every state a right to work state. Hardly anybody has a contract job anymore.
Yep.
It's just a very unwelcoming atmosphere for American workers. And now, with the pandemic, a lot of people are choosing life.
Yes.
They're deciding that minimum wage job just isn't worth it, especially when it's a front-facing public job where you have to deal with these anti-maskers and anti-vaxxers yelling and spitting Omicron in your face because they don't want to follow any rules.
That's right.
Whether it's flying in an airplane or going down to the Piggly Wiggly, people are sick of it. So you're going to find yourself in America doing a lot of self-checkout. You're going to find yourself having to suck it up.
That's right.
American employers are going to have to figure out a way to run their businesses without employees because they don't want to protect employees, and employees just don't want to die.
Yep, that's prudent.
And of course, there's a negative amount of people trying to get into this country right now. We don't, as much as people complain about these waves of immigrants and these waves of caravans, you do realize that the majority of those people are deported within like days of crossing our borders.
Yep.
The vast majority. Every new crisis, even during the Biden administration, they were like, oh my gosh, there's thousands of people down here. All these Republicans went down there. How quickly did they clean out all of those immigrants?
Yep.
They were back home and within a week.
Yep. In one day, 10,000 people were deported. And North Dakota sent their National Guard down there. To what?
Well, for the photo op, but at the end of the day, the majority of those people are going back to their countries. They're not going to be here to take up those positions. So that's going to be an ongoing problem for America, the employment. The January 6th vigil for what MAGA Trump supporters are calling quote unquote political prisoners. I don't believe that they are.
Yeah.
But that's what the MAGA people are calling them. Turns out that it was very poorly attended. Only around 15 people showed up.
Really?
Now there's more people in the media and more gawkers than there were actual vigil attendees. And among the people that did show up was comedian Jordan Klepper.
Oh, good.
Of The Daily Show, who has been doing a lot of very funny segments about the MAGA movement. So that is one of the
highlights of
the highlights of the aftermath.
Yeah.
Well, there's a lot of reactions. There's an anger, resentment from many of the people that attended this vigil about Biden's speech yesterday and about the events by Democrats, Nancy Pelosi's speech on the House floor.
All of that prayer vigil.
All of that. The moment of silence for the officers that were fallen, the heroes of the day, the D.C. officers. And there were no Republicans there. Well, I should say there were almost no Republicans there. Dick Cheney and Liz Cheney attended.
Yeah. Yeah. What a deal. I think about our congressional Senate representatives here in this area. We've got a bunch of Republicans, all from North Dakota, and I haven't seen them put out any good reason why they're just going along with all this stuff. They just want to keep their positions. But North Dakota's not being targeted to change the way they vote. North Dakota has voting machines. North Dakota has a system where Republicans get elected all the time. Why do they want to change that? So they're not jumping on this thing there's a big steal. And, then they throw in a few Democrats from Minnesota, and it's like, most of these congressional people, haven't been standing up. So it's like, Democrats and Republicans. So It just confuses me that locally they just want to keep it the way it is. They're not going to say much. They don't want to be targeted. And so I see why they wouldn't show up.
Mm-hmm. The other thing that just occurred is that yet another Capitol police officer has filed a lawsuit against Donald Trump for injuries. This particular officer suffered concussion and visual problems, ongoing vision problems, and argues that Trump himself inflamed the mob and includes Trump's social media posts in her civil complaint.
Oh.
This makes about the fifth or sixth January 6th officer
Wow.
to file their own civil lawsuits against Trump. And I have to say, after the speech from the president, mark my words, you're going to see excerpts of the January 6th Select Committee's findings in these lawsuits.
Okay.
Because they're part of the record, you see.
Yeah.
What the president said when he blamed the former president directly
Yeah.
and said that he is an ongoing threat to democracy,
Mm-hmm.
all of these things are going to show up in other lawsuits.
Wow.
Just you watch. Also, you're going to see this, I've been seeing it, in the sentencing, in the hearings for the insurrectionists.
Okay.
Judges are taking note of this. They're paying attention to what the insurrectionists are saying, and they're also paying attention to what the Select Committee is bringing out.
That's
So
good.
we're going to see more of that.
Good.
And members of Congress, many of whom originally, the day after or moments after the insurrection, called it a domestic terrorist attack and blamed Donald Trump, are now on the hot seat. And, you know, it couldn't have happened to anyone nicer than Ted Cruz. He got roasted yesterday
Oh, yeah?
on Tucker Carlson's show on
Really?
Fox News.
Huh.
Yes, he was brought behind the woodshed for a thorough lashing, tongue lashing.
Oh, really?
And, well, I'll let you listen for yourselves and tell me what you think on the other side of the segment here.
So if somebody assaults a cop, he should be charged and go to jail. I couldn't agree more. We have said that for years. But that person's still not a terrorist. How many people have been charged with terrorism on January 6th? Like, why'd you use that word? You're playing into the other side's characterization that, as Joe Kent just explained, allows them to define an entire population as foreign combatants. And you know that. So why'd you do it?
Huh. You know, I heard this yesterday, too, from a few other people. And it's like, no one's been charged with terrorism. No one's been charged with sedition. And so, therefore, it wasn't those things.
Well, Tucker Carlson is an heir to the Swanson fortune. And other than graduating from wearing a bow tie to an adult male tie, I really don't think that he has the understanding of the law to be making these kinds of statements. But Ted Cruz sure does.
Yeah.
He has studied the law. Ted Cruz knows exactly why the use of domestic terrorism applies and why nobody has been charged with domestic terrorism. By the way, domestic terrorism isn't a federal crime.
Okay.
Okay? And Ted Cruz knows that. I'm pretty sure Tucker Carlson does too, but I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt because he's not a lawyer. But Ted Cruz is. So he knows exactly the reason why. But just in case our audience doesn't, I'm going to explain it.
Oh, good.
And this comes from Tom Brzezinski, who is the Department of Justice Counsel on Domestic Terrorism Matters. Okay? He said that although the United States defines domestic terrorism as dangerous acts that appear intended to intimidate civilians, influence the government, or affect the conduct of government. There's no broad criminal statute that outlaws those activities. In many instances, the government is going to be constrained to a certain degree from stepping in front of a podium and saying, "Ladies and gentlemen, we're revealing domestic terrorism here." Federal prosecutors have fewer tools for charging domestic terrorists with criminal conduct than they have for terrorists affiliated with or inspired by foreign terrorist organizations like the Islamic State groups, who might commit the very same acts as domestic terrorists have. Though Brzezinski noted that there are a variety of other federal statutes, not explicitly terrorism related, that are applicable, that you can charge people under.
Okay.
So we have existing laws that we can charge people under for committing acts of domestic terrorism. The lack of domestic terrorism laws limits the ability at the federal level for federal prosecutors to charge white supremacists, neo-Nazis, and other extremists who commit acts of violence against Americans with a federal terrorism-related crime. Often, states have stronger cases to bring than the feds. Okay? As an example, Brzezinski used the case of a white supremacist named Kevin Harfem, who was sentenced to 32 years in federal prison for attempting to bomb a Martin Luther King Jr. Day Unity March in Spokane, Washington in 2011. Harfam pleaded guilty to 2 federal counts, the attempted use of a weapon of mass destruction and a hate crime charge at the federal level. Brzezinski notes that the hate crime charge essentially determined how the public understood this as a crime.
Okay.
The Harfam case was typically construed in terms of hate. This is a hate crime. This is how the public took it up. That's how the pundits referred to it. It's how the folks outside of government saw it. It was viewed through the prism of a hate crime. Folks seize on that and view this almost exclusively in terms of hate. What they miss is the fact that his underlying criminal activity clearly meets the statutory definition of domestic terrorism, without a doubt. Brzezinski noted that the government petitioned to the court for a terrorism enhancement during the sentencing phase was accepted by the judge.
Oh.
So you can add that enhancement and say, this qualifies as terrorism, and can we enhance the charge at the sentencing phase? And it was accepted. But that's only at the tail end of the prosecution, when the public view has already been shaped. So when domestic terrorist cases first unfold, the DOJ very rarely deploys that term, unless it's citing a specific statute.
Yep. It kind of shows how our society hasn't dealt with this sort of thing in a putting it in the law, codified in the law. It shows it's because, come on, our racism, our supremacist past as a country, and what got put into law, and haven't had to deal with other white people in this country, and it's just amazing. I remember when hate crime legislation wasn't out there, and all the work it took to get law enforcement to do an accent on a crime. You're in more trouble. And then they had terroristic threats was something that came up, and they started using quite a bit. And now domestic terrorism is adding another layer. And the law hasn't caught up with the realities of what the behavior is going on in our communities.
Well, that's not necessarily true. It's not that legislators haven't caught up. It's that Republicans have blocked any efforts to institute the laws. Let me give you an example, Duke.
All right.
During the Trump administration, there was a huge uptick in the number of terrorist groups that were committing terrorist acts. And so a bill was put forward to combat white supremacist violence, but the Republicans blocked it. The Justice Department, Ron Johnson was one of the people that helped to block this bill, citing that the Justice Department said that it would hamper their ability to work on domestic terrorist threats without explaining what that meant.
Wow.
But the Justice Department wouldn't fully explain why it was opposed to the bill that would enhance its ability to combat white supremacist violence, adding to concerns that the agency under former President Donald Trump was continuing to downplay or ignore the threat of far-right terror. Senate Republicans prevented a vote on the Domestic Terrorism Prevention Act. The bill, which passed the House unanimously, would have established offices in the Justice Department, the Department of Homeland Security, and the FBI dedicated to combating the rise and the threat of far-right extremist violence. Wouldn't it have been nice to have that in place for the January 6th insurrection?
For sure.
But they blocked it. They blocked that from being the law that could have been used on these domestic terrorist attacks. So the Tucker Carlsons of the world can sit there and go, nobody's been charged with domestic terrorism.
That's right.
When the Republicans blocked there from being a law that they could be charged under.
Oh, yeah. Well, he relies on people not knowing anything, so you're just going to take Tucker's word.
Oh, I'm not going to let that happen. Not here on Mexican Crossing Lines on 88.1 FM. No, sirree.
That's right.
I'm going to bring you the important background of information so you have all of that information to understand what's really going on. Now, let me just add to this that on March 2nd of 2021, FBI Director Christopher Wray defended the Bureau's handling of alarming intelligence leading up to January 6th mob attack on the U.S. Capitol, saying that he had long been warning of the rise in such domestic terrorist threats over the past year in 2020. Quote, "We have significantly grown the number of investigations and arrests," Wray told the Senate Judiciary Committee in his first testimony since the riot involving supporters of former President Donald Trump. The FBI director testified in September that the number of such cases was about 1,000. By the end of 2020, there were about 1,400 such cases. And after January 6th, the figure ballooned again, the director said. Domestic terrorism has, quote, been metastasizing around the country for a long time now, and it's not going away anytime soon, Wray said. Whenever we've had the chance, we've tried to emphasize that this is a top concern. So, for those who keep saying, and I know that the people on my Twitter comments can't see this, but I'm going to post this program on my social media accounts so that hopefully people will become educated and stop asking the stupid question, how many people have been charged with domestic terrorism?
Yeah. What is that called, parroting? That's at media_PPP as well. You'll be posting that, right?
Yes, but again, I cannot emphasize enough, when people say this, when you hear people saying, stop saying it's an insurrection, nobody's been charged with insurrection. Stop saying it's domestic terrorism, nobody's charged with you can't charge federally when there is no law federally to charge them under.
That's right.
There's a definition of what domestic terrorism is in the law, but there's no penalty for the breaking of that law.
Wow.
And as I just told you, when we have tried to advance legislation, Republicans have blocked that legislation. So they don't want for us to be able to prosecute domestic terrorism because the majority of them are white supremacist groups.
Exactly.
We also still do not have an anti-lynching law. That's all.
Yep.
That is all. Period. Exclamation point.
Yep.
Moving on to some good news as we close out our show today. I want you to listen because we have a verdict and the sentencing, we have a sentencing now for the McMichaels and for Roddy Bryant in the case of the murder of Ahmaud Arbery. As you know, all men were found guilty of murdering this innocent young man just 1 year older than our son Nemo.
Wow.
Just a little kid,
Yep.
a young man in the prime of his life, at the beginning of his life, snuffed out by these white supremacist vigilante murderers. Convicted murderers. And this was the victim's statement of Ahmaud Arbery's mom, Wanda Cooper Jones. Listen.
Your Honor, these men have chose to lie and attack my son and his surviving family. They each have no remorse and do not deserve any leniency. This wasn't a case of mistaken identity or mistaken fact. They chose to target my son because they didn't want him in their community. They chose to treat him differently than other people who frequently visited their community. And when they couldn't sufficiently scare him or intimidate him, they killed him. My youngest son, he was born on Mother's Day of 1994. He had a smile so bright it lit up a room.
Wow.
And that's not the only statement that was given. Ahmaud Arbery's sister, his dad, there were various statements. I just wanted you to hear the one from his mother because it was so heartbreaking to see the impact that this had on this family. And, you know, furthermore, when we talk about justice, the fact that these men were convicted, and you're going to hear the sentencing in just a moment. I want to play the sentencing by the judge in this case, who, once again, was not messing around with these people. He was not there for any drama. He was just going to lay it out for people. There was so much cover-up in this case. It is so sad to me that in my lifetime, I mean, this isn't the birth of a nation. This isn't Jim Crow. This is 2022. And we still can't get extrajudicial lynchings by cops and vigilantes convicted unless you have massive protests and outcry across the country and numerous video angles. I mean, it's like, why is that? Why is it that we can't get a conviction unless we have video, protests, demands that prosecution happen? In this case, the police lied to this woman and tried to cover up for the murderers. So did the district attorney.
Yes. Yep.
These people should also be punished for the cover-up, for the harm, for the abuse of power that they chose in this case. But very likely we won't see that.
Yep.
So it is, you know, such an important verdict, and I hope that it brings some solace to the family and the BIPOC community at large. Take a listen to the sentencing. Life without parole for Travis McMichael and Gregory McMichael.
Mr. McMichael, the court sentences you as follows. Count 1, malice murder, life without the possibility of parole. Count 2, felony murder, is vacated by operation of law. Count 3, felony murder, vacated by operation of law. Count 4, felony murder, vacated by operation of law. Count 5, felony murder, vacated by operation of law. Count 6, aggravated assault, merges into count 1. Count 7, aggravated assault. The court sentences the defendant to 20 years consecutive to count 1. Count 8, false imprisonment, merges into count 1. Count 9, attempted false imprisonment, 5 years concurrent to count 7. That is life plus 20. Greg McMichael, the court sentences you as follows. Count 1, malice murder. Defendant was found not guilty. Count 2, felony murder. Life without the possibility of parole. Count 3, felony murder. Vacated. When I say vacated, it's vacated by operation of law in all cases. I'm not going to repeat it. Count 4, vacated. Count 5, vacated. Count 6 merges into count 2. Count 7, aggravated assault, 20 years consecutive to count 2. Count 8, 10 years concurrent to count 7. Count 9, 5 years concurrent to count 7. That is life plus 20 years. Roddy Bryant, I do want to separate.
So Roddy Bryant did have the possibility of parole, but at his age and with the sentence that he has to, by the way, there's still federal charges.
Okay.
And they made a petition to the court that they would accept the federal sentencing instead of this sentencing, the state sentencing.
Okay.
And to my point about how much better the state's cases are in these cases of hate crimes,
They have more enhancements.
they have the ability to put more years and more charges and more power
I see.
behind the sentencing. So the state rejected their request
Wow.
to take the federal time instead. Federal time is harder to serve because you don't get, parole. You serve most of your time.
I see.
But they were willing to get the federal time rather than to get to state sentencing.
Wow.
And the mother of Ahmaud Arbery said, hell to the no. And not only did she reject it, they want the sentencing from the state and the federal to both run concurrently so that
wow.
these people never see
Yeah.
the light
They'll be in
of
jail
day.
for the rest of their lives, yes.
Amen, amen,
Good,
amen to
good.
that. So that's all I have for you today here on Mexican Crossing Lines with your hosts, Cindy Gomez-Schempp.
And Duke Gomez-Schempp.
You've been listening to 88.1 FM, KPPPLP, Fargo Moorhead, a Mexican Crossing Lines, where we are adding local color to your airwaves. And we will see you here again very soon on 88.1 FM. Thanks for listening, and have a blessed evening.